Hello friends, this week's Ecstatic Buddhist Dialogue is on the question of whether the ecstatic altered states of consciousness that are otherwise known as jhana or samadhi, whether they are just simply mental projections or wishful thinking. Now, we could look at the major mystics of the world religions like Jesus and the Buddha and Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Rumi, Kabir, and they all reported ecstatic altered states of consciousness that were characterized by bliss, joy, and ecstasy. And if we were to just simply dismiss them as a naive devotee who had those experiences just as the product of a mental projection or wishful thinking, then we'd have to, of course, dismiss, their contribution to society or to philosophy in general. And what we see in the lives of those mystics, and in fact, what we see in my personal life and in the life of the contemplatives that are my, the body of my case histories, we find that the experience is transformational. So if the experience is transformational, how can we say that the ecstatic altered state of consciousness is strictly the product of mental projection? I don't think we can, and I don't think we should. And anybody who dismisses these spiritual experiences of the mystics as just mental projection, I don't think that person is necessarily using logic and critical thinking. It's illogical to dismiss the major mystics as just people who are projecting mentally to have those states. Now there are people who, in fact, there's whole schools who think that the samadhi states are just a product of mental projection, and in fact they instruct their students to engage in traversing the 8 samadhi states as a kind of mental jungle gym in which they go up and down in the samadhi states. Now, can we believe that that's all samadhi is just a mental projection in which we go up and down in a mental jungle gym? Well, I don't buy it, and that's not how I got to my ecstatic states, and my subject case histories. They also did not get to their ecstatic altered states of consciousness by just going up and down a mental jungle gym, of mentally projecting what they thought or believed was an ecstatic altered state of consciousness. The other thing that's characteristic about the people who have these experiences, whether they're the mystics like Teresa of Avila or whether they're the mystics of today, is that most of them encountered stuff that they had no idea was going to occur. Even of those people who are listening to this video series and read my essays on the Great Western Vehicle website, I attempt to describe the experience, but most people who actually get to the experience, even if they have read spiritual literature, the experience is way beyond description. So I think we can dismiss the idea that the ecstatic altered states of consciousness are just the product of mental projection. Oh, and by the way, one other point on that, as we're dismissing that the idea of mental projection, is the second samadhi state is characterized by the stilling of the mind. So if the mind is still, how can it be, projecting the experience? And in fact, as we see as the subject goes deeper into samadhi, there's less and less volitional activity. The subject almost never dictates the experience. In fact, I would say the subject never dictates the experience. They just simply go into the samadhi state and just ride it as deeply as it goes, and whatever happens, happens. And, you know, those ecstatic states occur, and it's certainly not a product of the person projecting the experience. The experience happens to the subject. The subject is passive throughout the whole experience. And in fact, if the subject is not passive throughout the whole experience, then we can predict that the description of the experience of that person is probably not a samadhi state, because the samadhi states are, you know, occur in a passive state. So it's not mentally projective. It simply is self-arising. It arises from the experience of meditation. And the practice of meditation is about the stilling of the mind and the removing of stress and anxiety and just letting go. You know, almost all the mystics talk about letting go, submission, surrender, thy will be done. You know, this kind of language is characteristic of the mystics. And if they're doing that kind of stuff, then how can we believe that all the religious experiences of the world are just mental projection? Well, I don't think we can, and I believe we can say that anybody who dismisses these experiences as purely mental projection is irrational, is not, you know, has not studied the subject, and is certainly not engaged in the process to get there. Okay, thank you, friends, and may you have a blissful and ecstatic week.